Creativity is, by definition, creating something out of nothing.
If you're an artist, you learn that the thing that you think you're creating is not the thing that you end up creating.
The idea of failure in some ways is saying, I had an idea of what I thought needed to happen or what should happen, and it turned out differently. It's actually not failure at all.
This is what art does. Art gets to the soul, gets to the place where values, where relationships, where meaning is made. It's change, evolve, grow, stretch.
So this is a little bonus section that I put together from 3 short conversations that we had while we were preparing to do the series. The first is just a short story of mine as I went through this process of realizing what making it, quote unquote, means, and then also dealing with the questions of selling out. Secondly, we share our stories of embarking on a pretty risky path for our life choices, and these questions of, did I make the right choice? And if I did, what does that look like? And how do I know if I made the right choice? And then thirdly, we discuss gratitude, and Louisa shares with us a little exercise that she uses as part of her practice when things get really challenging or when she gets moments of despair. Then finally, I just want to thank you for joining us on this journey. It's been a true honor to share this time and space with you. At the moment when I sort of shifted from I'm trying to make it, right? I mean, that's kind of that's the LA phrase. I want to make it.
Yeah, right. Was this as an actor or as a director?
Filmmaker.
As a filmmaker.
As a filmmaker. Okay. Was that I had made it, actually. I had, and it wasn't that I was exactly where I wanted to be in my career or whatever, but I was doing what I wanted to do, and the making it always puts the art somewhere further away from where you are at that moment.
Right.
So it's always this sort of future thing, I'm trying to make it, as opposed to here I am and I'm actually doing something. I'm making art, so I'm making art. I don't need to make it. And the big shift in some ways was I was riding my motorcycle and I pulled up next to this guy driving the 750 Li BMW.
Yeah.
I'm like, who's driving this thing, right?
Yeah.
I just kind of look over. And the guy just looked miserable. He was like mid 40s, white dude, just looked so Hollywood, short cropped beard, and just looked miserable. And I made up this whole story. I made up a character for him, which is the guy who came to Hollywood like everybody does because I have a story I want to tell, a really important story. And I do whatever I need to do or can do in order to pay the bills, right? So I'm going to do a McDonald's commercial. I'm going to do a crappy horror movie. I'm going to do whatever I can so I can pay my bills. And at a certain point, one of those things kind of clicks, right? And maybe you have some fortune in that you're making something that doesn't really fill your soul, but it fills your bank account.
Yeah.
Right? And then you think, oh, this is great. I'm going and I go out and I buy my nice car with my big payments. And then eventually I buy my house. And then I get to this point where I want to, I'm not really doing what I came to do. I've kind of sold out.
Yeah.
Right. And, well, basically that's the point where the sellout begins. That's where that starts. And this is that all of a sudden I don't actually need to keep doing this thing I don't love to do, or that's a bit of a compromise to pay my rent.
Yeah.
But I'm doing it because I need to now maintain this sort of new artificial lifestyle that I've created.
Yep. It's a bit of a trap.
It's a trap.
Yeah.
So that's what you've seen.
I've seen it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And and it was, but by sort of putting all of that thing that I saw into this one poor guy that was just having a bad day in his really nice car, was that, where was I in that process? And I'd always believed that I was doing whatever I needed to do to survive. And people have different barometer for what it means to sort of be free financially. Some people, it means I need to have $1 million in my bank account at all times. For some people, it means I need to be able to retire with $1 million. Everyone has a different barometer. Yeah. And the barometer moves, of course, for most of us, right? Because at first, you just want to pay your bills, and then you want to pay your bills and go on vacation. Then you want to pay your bills, go on vacation, and buy a new computer. Right. And all of a sudden, we're shifting what it means to be where we need to be comfortable, to validate ourselves as successful professionals.
Yeah.
To me, it had always been, I want to be able to graduate my kids from Waldorf High School and not be in debt. So at that point, I drive home, and unfortunately, we're talking about all this now. We're going to end up rehashing it.
Yeah, I know. This is what
But
we
that's
always
good.
do.
Was I needed to be able to not be in debt, and I just did a spreadsheet. What are my assets? What are my debts? If I quit my job today because I feel like I'm selling out doing it, can I hit my goal of being free? And sure enough, my spreadsheet went down. If I got a terrible job, if I had to go back to tending bar or whatever it was I was doing, and sold my house and paid everything off, by the time the kids graduated high school, I'd have $0. And to me, that was financial freedom.
So connect this with the motorcycle experience, because I kind of lost
That was this whole thing of coming up and seeing, here's somebody who sort of represented Hollywood in some ways, driving a $150,000 car,
right,
and doesn't look happy. But if you're
Right.
a white dude in California driving a $150,000 car, you should be really happy,
Yeah.
right? That's great. You're at the top of the world, right? You're in the top 1% of the 1%, basically, right? So that's a great place to be, but he seemed unhappy. And then you go around, you see a lot of people who've actually been very successful in the entertainment arts and are very unhappy. So what makes people unhappy when you get to do what you want to do? So millions of people around the world, billions of people, would trade places with almost everybody who in Hollywood who has a nice house, a nice car, and gets to go to work doing what they all dreamed of doing when they were younger. So why are they unhappy? Why was I unhappy?
And
Why was I unhappy?
Yeah. Why were you?
why are they unhappy?
Well, let's just.
I mean, I can make up stories in my head, but what do you think?
Well, let's just talk about Matthew's. So there you are, top of your game.
Yeah.
You're in Hollywood.
Right.
You're a Hollywood filmmaker.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
making-
just to make sure that everybody understands.
But he wasn't at the
that.
top of his game.
Well, in some way, I mean, I was
driving a
I was-
moped.
No, I'm driving a 1100cc motorcycle,
Okay.
Not a moped.
and I have a 6-figure income.
Okay.
Right.
So that's good.
Yeah.
And I'm making movies all the time. I'm doing stuff. I'm
Yeah.
developing projects.
Well, you're rubbing shoulders with some very famous people.
Yeah, but more importantly, I'm making movies.
Right.
And
You're doing it.
and I'm making 6 figures doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's cool.
That's supposed to mean I
Right,
admit
right,
it,
right.
right?
Right.
In theory.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, but I'd had conflict with some of the people I was working with, and I'd gotten in a fight with a producer I was working with because we had a different perspective on a story. To me, racial and gender diversity is enormously important in storytelling, and genders need to be both treated fairly, as do races. In work that I participate in, and I was fighting that. We were working on a script that it was an animated script intended for children that failed the Bechdel test miserably.
No way.
Miserably. It was 2 female characters, the love interest and the mom, and the only time they talk is when they talk about the lead male character.
Oh, no way.
And I'd been fighting this, and I finally hit heads, and I got shut down, and I thought, you know what, fine, I'm just going to shut my mouth. And I'm in the middle of a divorce or beginning in a divorce. I can't afford to rock the boat too much. I've got a good job, and I can just show up and do the job I'm being asked to do.
Right.
And after a month, I was ready to quit. I was so miserable.
Right.
And it was at that point that I said, I went and I looked at my spreadsheet and said, could I quit this job? Well, I could, but I said, well, better. I'm just going to fight for what I believe in, and if I get fired, I get fired. So what? And it was just that shift in my energy. I went in the next day, I realized this was a story and a script that had actually started before I was brought into the company. I said, I'm going to let that one go. But every time I hire a writer, I start working on a project, they get literature, particularly my male writers who are just stuck in basically their own story.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's the literature. You got to read this before you write. And these conversations about how do we make our characters all more interesting by not putting them into these gender stereotypes. But just by shifting that in me and saying, going back to, wait, if I keep going down this road, if I continue to show up and do something I don't believe in, I've sold out because I'm just doing it so that I can maintain a lifestyle. That's not okay, right? So the shift that takes place is that because I can relax in that way, now I can actually go back to what was important to me, which is telling stories that are going to make a difference in the world.
Right.
And that ties right back into
Yes.
what you were saying.
Yeah.
And that is why when she said that way, when she phrased it that way, I said, absolutely, just making movies isn't good enough for me.
Yeah.
Right? Just telling stories is not good enough. They have to be good stories, and the world has to be at least a little bit better, or I have to believe that it is because of the story that I'm telling. Because a little boy or a little girl who's watching these animated movies it's going to break some of the other imagery that they are being bombarded with that is actually limiting their thinking. Mm-hmm. Right. So in that case, yeah, just making movies isn't good enough. And I'd rather not make movies. At this point, that was kind of that moment too. I would rather not make movies. I'd rather tend bar and make people happy standing behind the bar and telling good stories and having fun with people and whatever, instead of making movies that were not benefiting the world at all.
Right.
It was a tough call to make, but it was a necessary call.
We chose a path and we stayed with it, even though it was not only risky, but costly. And I think that is interesting for our listeners because a lot of people start out and they have a dream and they abandon that dream in order to feel safe and comfortable. They take the job, they take the thing, they right? And there's this tension between what I'm doing in order to get by and in my life and what other people expect of me, or what my parents expect of me, or what I expect of me, and who I really am and what I wish I were doing.
I think you call that the refusal of the call, right?
The refusal of the call is, like, oh no, you don't mean me. I'm just this little person over here.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is that if you actually follow that calling and follow that path, which we have, you're in for some suffering. At least that's been our experience.
Yeah, and we would like to help others. We'd like to mitigate that suffering, which is a part of the reason why the three of us are here doing this podcast.
But not only are we mitigating the suffering.
Are we mitigating the suffering?
I don't know if we are, because I don't know if you can.
I'm not sure that we can.
But what we can do is hopefully instill a confidence in our listeners that this suffering is okay. It's part of the hero's journey. It's once again the trash compactor. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can't have a good Star Wars movie without the trash compactor, but you can have a comfortable life without a trash compactor. Yeah. You just can't be a hero without a trash.
Okay, so what I was going to say is I think in my life it's too early to tell whether I made the right choice.
You did, and I can tell you how you can be sure of that fact.
I'm sure I made the right choice in one dimension, but in another dimension, like, I'm not debt free. I'm not successful, really. Kind of like maybe.
Dude, we're like working in Zimbabwe on a national scale project.
Yeah, but we haven't been paid for it.
Yeah, but next week we'll be paid for it.
I'm just saying these choices, in my experience, they're fraught to begin with. And they remain fraught, and the stakes get higher, and the pain gets more, and the suffering increases, and the questions about, am I on the right path? Is this worth it? Am I doing the right thing? It all just increases and increases and increases. Now, I should say that the one thing that does markedly improve, well, there's a few things. Number one, my sense of strength, my inner core of who I am, my presence, my unshakability. Like my moral core, so inwardly, totally, right? My relationships with you, with my friends, with my kids,
yep.
With my parents, all of that is solid and good, and so that's on track. And my art, like I feel like every day that I work in my studio, the art is one step closer to being where I want to be. Now, the world does not know who I am. I have under 20 fans. No Instagram followers.
3 of them are in this room.
Yeah, right? And so that leaves another like 17, and then you take like Iron and Fairney. Okay, so my bank account is way in the red. Debts, don't own a house. Robbing Peter to pay Paul every month. So yeah, the inner qualities and the inner strengths and the relationship and the art, but everything that I might have gained by taking a more conventional path, I still don't have. And I don't know if I ever will.
Everyone is on their own path. But there's one way to clearly be 100% certain that you have made the right choice.
We're waiting for it. Drum roll.
You can't change the past. It's been done.
So
it
therefore
has
it's
to
the
have been
right
the
one.
right one because it's what happened.
Sounds like a lot of trust.
Yeah.
It's not even it's not even
Slowly
trust
working
or
through my
faith.
mind.
It's just very simply the whole idea of maybe I didn't make the right choice is
A fruitless inquiry.
It's a fruitless inquiry. Exactly. But the more fruitful inquiry is not did I make the right choice, but you can ask why questions, right?
Yeah.
You know, you can ask into it, but not the whether or not it was the right choice. It was.
Right.
But how was it the right choice? Why was it the right choice? Where could I have made other choices in order to inform myself now moving forward?
I also think there's a major reframe as well, because so much about life is about perspective. So you can have one perspective, you can have 7 different perspectives before breakfast, just to misquote Owen Barfield, right? So the perspective that I have is not, just to build on what you're saying, was this the right choice? That's not really the question, and it's a red herring, as you say.
Right.
But it's more a question of actually you did make the right choice, and there's evidence for it. And the evidence is, for the first time in your life, you feel your feet on a path. It's a narrow path, but it's a very solid one. It's about the most solid path you could create. It's invisible. It's not built of materiality. It's not built of finances or stability in a material sense. It is built out of a spiritual foundation. Relationships, inner work, a rhythmic practice of rock solid meditation, so that no matter what happens to you psychically, what comes at you in the world, you will not be knocked off your rock of Gibraltar. You cannot see the wisdom in the choices you make in the moment. You can see them in hindsight. And if you look, and if you have a particular lens on, you can see this red thread, and you can just marvel. Like when I'm coaching, I've coached many people, and when I get to know them well enough, I can just sit there and marvel at the wisdom that is not in the day waking consciousness making these decisions. The wisdom can only be seen in hindsight, looking back, saying, wow, such diverse choices that you made, but the exact right one to get you where you are now, just exactly what you needed. Mm-hmm. It's a remarkable experience to have that kind of intimacy with someone's biography. So anyway.
Well, so for me, I mean, I don't doubt the the wisdom or the fruits of the path that I've taken, but I also would be cautious to recommend it.
Oh, fair enough.
But
right.
But absolutely, I would
never
recommend my choices to anybody.
Yeah.
Particularly not my children.
And yet, there's also something about like, well, I also made those choices because as I grew up, I saw the adults ahead of me, older than me. Mm-hmm. This was the 70s. And I thought a lot of them were basket cases. Right through the 70s and 80s.
They were.
And I noticed that, okay, there's something amiss with just going for money all the time. Because I could look out, I could see the adults were pretending to live, but secretly depressed or addicted or just
angry,
wounded.
Well, yeah, it was really unable to understand their wounds, and therefore how to deal with them.
And so
then it's
I
always
made it
band-aiding or something.
Yeah, exactly. Always band-aiding. And I was like, man, I don't want to do that. I want to find that inner strength and grow from there. So that I could recommend, and I think what I wrote down in my notes as you were talking, both of you, is that, after these big learning experiences, something that happened for me was that my life purpose either shifted or just metamorphosed. The older I get, the more I genuinely want to accomplish something meaningful, and the more I'm like, I don't know, checking a tendency to make it. I would be okay dying poor if I had made it in all these other areas that are even more important. In other words, that I could take with me, right? And so those are good choices, I think.
Yeah.
I had a kind of like mini life crisis, which I thought was pretty intense when I was about 21. But now, the last few years have so much kicked my ass that I think a lot of my mentor, who told me many things when he was, 47, 50. I first met him when he was about 47, and now he's 70 something, and I've known him all those years. But he was on the other side of getting his ass kicked when I met him. So he would speak to me as like, good luck with that. And, I'd say something and he'd kind of half smile and cock his head and be like, see how that goes. And now I find myself realizing why he said those things. Because the path that he was on, the path that he taught me, that I've been on, certain things become choice points in life where you know that in order to make the right choice for you, you give up something you thought was really important to you. So you give up just the hunt for fame, recognition, money, because you realize that your motive is not the motive that you want to carry into your life.
Yeah.
So there's a maturation process that I'm also talking about here, where the motive changes.
Yeah.
From what it was when I was 25 to what it is and what it is now and what is ever more becoming. My life purpose shifted from wanting to be famous and wealthy and recognized to wanting to make a contribution, wanting to make art, wanting to help others, like getting a body of work done before I check out of here, so that body of work is there left for others and can benefit others.
The twins at one point were hiking up through Elizabeth Pass, which is an 11,500 foot pass. And we're going up, and after day one, it just started raining on us. And we cooked in the rain, we set up our tent in the rain, we walked in the rain, and our shoes are full of water. And I had given up being able to see the beauty in this. Right? And I'm so frustrated because I'm tense because I've got these two kids with me, and it's my responsibility to make sure they don't die of pneumonia or get lost, and that they eat, and so even setting up, in the evenings, there's stress around making sure that we don't get too much water in the tent, and I carry this stress with me, and now we're climbing up this pass, and my boots are just full of water, and I turn around to complain about it. And I seriously turned around and I was about to say, would this rain just freaking stop already? And I turn around and I forget which of my twins comes up and just says, isn't it so beautiful out here when it rains like this?
That's awesome.
And
what can you say?
So there was an hour or more, probably a couple of days, where even though we're out in this beauty, I'm carrying this weight with me.
Yeah.
The emotional weight, the practical weight. This kid just told me that I was wasting my experience.
That brings up this. I think one of the exercises that is just so simple that it's so easy to discard, but it's so profound and powerful if you actually do it, is that gratitude exercise.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I still do it. I've been doing it for 10 years.
Yeah, you have. And the gratitude exercise, like to see my beautiful wife, to connect with my beautiful kids, even though one of our kids was really having a hard time because, you know, she's 13, going through stuff, whatever. Like, to search out those things to be grateful for, that is and was a go-to source of nourishment and renewal and
that
stability.
thing transformed my life.
And
that
so,
little exercise.
Yeah, like we got kicked out of our house, but we lucked into this other beautiful house, and where we can see the stars at night, and we have a hot tub, and we have a view, and it's like, wow, how did this just like grace, right? And so there is a lot to be grateful for, even in those times of darkness.
So the gratitude exercise is a way of looking at the world with the glass half full rather than the glass half empty. It's like an introduction into this realm of shifting your perspective, because ultimately that is the thing that you can control in your life. No matter what is happening to you, your perspective and that is where you are free. You're truly free to choose what you want to feel and the perspective that you take on the situation. So one way you can kind of start to build that freedom back into your life is the gratitude exercise. And it's deceptively simple, but if you use it over a long period of time, it can really shift things for you. And you're naturally good at glass half full, but I was born naturally bad at it. I was always, and I still have the habit of seeing the glass, at first seeing the glass half empty. And one of the things that I struggled with for a long time was something called dysthymia, which is it's a term that kind of means you tend to be more depressive than not, or unhappy than not. It's a kind of a low level of unhappiness or depressive tendencies. It's not a mental illness or anything like that. It's just a term that helps you understand, I tend to see the negative in life. And the gratitude exercise turned that around for me. And it's basically think of 3 things for which you're grateful. And as you do it, you try to call up in your soul a feeling of gratitude for that thing. So at the moment, we live in this beautiful house, so every day I feel really grateful for this house. That it's somewhere where we've landed and the kids have their needs met in terms of bedrooms and, space that they can decorate and play with and create whatever it is that I can find within myself to be grateful for. It could be just my cup of tea, right? It doesn't have to be big, grand things. Just something for which I'm grateful. My journal, or the thing I did last night, I'm grateful that I did that. And doing that 3 times, thinking of 3 things, doing that every single day, every morning when you wake up, because I don't know about you, but when I get attacked by negative thoughts, it's typically in the morning or the middle of the night or both. I have spoken to people who say, no, for me it's in the late afternoon. That's when it happens. It's like whenever you get attacked the most by your negative thoughts, that's when you do your gratitude exercise.
Right. So the feeling of gratitude is more important than the thing that you're grateful for. Because I can't imagine turning my life around with gratitude for my cup of tea. But if I really go into gratitude, I would tend to think about how the tea got there and be grateful for the farmers and the blah blah blah. I could saturate that thought with very meaningful concepts.
You could, but that's not what I was doing.
So what were you doing?
I was literally just grateful for whatever I could. It was basically, instead of being constantly in the state of poor me, just poor me, because it's a blanket perception. But in that moment of kind of subsonic unhappiness, if you just have a moment where you're thinking, well, I'm got gratitude for this thing, this little thing here, I can be grateful for.
You just interrupt that.
Yes, and it's the same with the concentration exercise and the same with the peace exercise. The same concept. if you just interrupt the habit, even if it's just for a minute,
Yeah.
it has great power
Gotcha.
used
Totally.
rhythmically
Yeah.
over time. This is the power of rhythm.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's interesting you say that, particularly with the concentration exercise too, because in general, I don't have a hard time falling asleep, but going through difficult periods,
With stress.
that concentration exercise is one of the huge ones, actually.
It helps you fall asleep.
And it can help fall asleep because ultimately what it's doing is it's taking the mind off of all that chatter and all the why me or poor me or all the difficulties.
Yeah.
You were talking about doing it with a button, focusing on a button.
Yeah.
From my my acting and singing days, it's really just focusing on the breath coming in and out, and it's the same thing. All of a sudden, if I'm really focusing anywhere besides the imaginations, or the imaginations, in this case, not the right word, just
Or
these
the dialogues.
these inner dialogues,
Yeah.
these fantasies, all of the stuff that I will conjure up to keep me on a loop or to keep me in that frustration. Thinking that by lying here repeating this thought a million times, I'm going to somehow solve it,
Yeah, right.
which I found actually doesn't actually solve the problem.
No, it's like a loop.
Yeah.
Constant loop.
Right.
Yeah.